gavel cracked like a rifle shot. "Sold, to Mrs. Vance." The crowd recoiled. Elara Vance's knuckles were bone white on her purse, her gaze fixed not on the auctioneer, but on the man chained to the post. Silas Thorne. The wild mountain man, scarred and silent. As rain lashed the dusty square, his eyes, ancient and startlingly blue, locked onto hers. He didn't move, didn't speak to the crowd, but his lips shaped two words, soundlessly, just for her. Little Sparrow. The pet name only Thomas had ever used. Her breath stopped. Bitterroot, Montana Territory, wasn't kind. Nestled like a forgotten spur in the shadow of the Sawtooth Peaks, it was a collection of wind-scoured timber buildings huddled against the vast, indifferent sweep of high prairie and dark pine forest. Isolation wasn't just geography, it was etched into the stooped shoulders of the miners, the wary eyes of the shopkeepers, the brittle gossip traded over watered-down whiskey in the Lonesome Star Saloon. Judgment, Elara Vance knew, was the town's primary currency, paid out freely to anyone who dared step outside its narrow, fearful lines. She was a regular recipient. Widow Vance. 2 years since the fever took Thomas, and a year since the quiet, hollow-eyed grief had settled into something harder, colder, like permafrost in her soul. They whispered about her, of course. The way she kept to her small homestead a mile east of town, working Thomas's claim alone. The way she wore her dark hair severely pinned back, her calico dresses practical and unadorned, her gray eyes holding a distance that discouraged sympathy. Some said she was touched by grief, others that she was simply too proud, too stubborn for her own good. Elara ignored them. The ache behind her ribs was monument enough. She needed no spectators. Today the spectacle belonged to Silas Thorne. He stood on the crude wooden auction block outside the sheriff's office, rain plastering his long matted hair to a face weathered beyond its years, crisscrossed with scars that spoke of violence, not time. His buckskins were filthy, torn. Heavy manacles bound his wrists, linked to a chain around his waist. Rumor painted him a demon, a hermit who talked to wolves, who'd killed men over a glance, who'd somehow survived a fall into Dead Man's Gorge. Ostracized wasn't strong enough. He was a creature from the wild peaks, dragged into the light and found monstrous. Sheriff Pike, his face a grim mask, was selling Thorne's labor contract. 6 months of indentured servitude to settle fines for disturbing the peace and trespassing. Mostly, Elara suspected, for simply being Silas Thorne. The bidding was sparse, nervous. Old man Henderson, needing a strong back for his failing mine, offered a pittance. Jed Carter, the smithy, muttered something about needing a stump puller, but looked away when Thorne's unnerving blue gaze swept over him. The mountain man stood utterly still, a statue carved from granite and hardship, his expression unreadable beneath the dirt and rain. Yet Elara felt a prickle on her neck. His stillness wasn't submission, it was the coiled tension of a predator assessing the trap. Then it happened. As the auctioneer, a weaselly man named Finch, called for final bids, Thorne's head turned slowly, not towards the bidders, but directly towards Elara, standing slightly apart under the awning of Miller's Mercantile. Rainwater streamed down his face, tracing the deep lines. His eyes, shockingly vivid against the grime, met hers, and his lips moved. Silent, deliberate. Little Sparrow. The world tilted. Thomas's voice, warm and teasing, echoed in that silent utterance. He'd called her that from their courting days, a private endearment born from her slight frame and the way she'd flit nervously at socials. No one knew, not her sister back east, not her closest neighbor Martha, only Thomas. And now, this man, this wild chained creature, a cold shock, sharper than the rain, pierced her grief-numbed core. It wasn't possible. Going once. Finch squawked, oblivious. Henderson spat tobacco juice into the mud, shaking his head, driven by a force she didn't understand. Grief's madness, desperation, or a terrifying spark of impossible hope. Elara's hand shot up. Her voice, usually soft, cut through the drizzle. $50. A collective gasp rippled through the dozen onlookers. Martha, standing beside her, grabbed her arm. Elara, have you lost your senses? That man's poison. He'll slit your throat in your sleep. Sheriff Pike frowned, his hand resting near his pistol. Mrs. Vance, you sure about this? He ain't housebroken. Elara ignored them, her eyes locked with Thorne's. His expression hadn't changed, but she saw it now, a flicker deep within those glacial blue depths. Not malice, recognition, curiosity, something utterly unnerving. I'm sure, Sheriff, $50. Her inheritance money meant for seed. Money she couldn't spare. Finch shrugged, eager to be rid of the problem. Going twice. Sold. To Mrs. Vance. The gavel cracked. The deed was done. As Pike approached her with the contract, the townsfolk melted away, casting backward glances of mingled pity and horror. Martha squeezed her arm once, her expression terrified, before hurrying off. Elara stood alone, the rain soaking the shoulders of her shawl, the scrawled contract damp in her hand. Pike handed her the heavy iron key to the manacles. He's your problem now, ma'am. Good luck. You'll need it. He tipped his hat and strode off, leaving her facing the chained mountain man. Silas Thorne stepped down from the block, the chains clanking. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence immense, even hunched slightly. He stopped before her, rainwater dripping from his beard onto the mud. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his gaze intense, searching. Then, slowly, deliberately, his eyes drifted past her shoulder, towards the distant rain-shrouded track that led to her homestead. His voice, when it finally came, was a low rasp rough as sandstone, yet carrying an uncanny intimate clarity beneath the downpour. He didn't whisper it this time. He spoke it, just for her. Still got that crooked fence post by the gate, the one Thomas always meant to fix. Elara froze. The breath left her lungs. The crooked post. Thomas's eternal good-natured procrastination. A tiny mundane detail of their shared life, known only to them. How could he know? The key felt like ice in her hand. The storm wasn't just overhead, it was roaring inside her skull. The mountain man knew things he absolutely terrifyingly should not. The iron key felt alien in Elara's palm, cold and heavy as her disbelief. Silas Thorne's low rasp about the crooked fence post echoed in the silence left by the vanished townsfolk and the relentless drumming rain. He knew. The impossibility of it coiled tight in her chest, a serpent of fear tangled with a terrifying fragile thread of something else, a hope she dared not name. The walk back to her homestead, a mile east of Bitterroot's judgmental gaze, was a journey through a waking dream. Silas walked a pace behind, his chains clinking a grim counterpoint to the squelch of mud beneath their boots. He didn't speak again, his presence a looming shadow at her back, radiating an unsettling quietude. The vast rain-lashed prairie stretched around them, the distant sawtooth peaks shrouded in mist like brooding giants. Her small cabin, nestled against a copse of wind-bent pines, looked achingly familiar yet suddenly strange. Inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the faint, lingering ghost of Thomas's pipe tobacco did little to soothe her. She gestured stiffly towards the rough-hewn table. "Sit, I'll find something for those chains." Her voice sounded thin, reedy. She couldn't bring herself to look at him directly, focusing instead on rummaging in a drawer for a file Thomas used for tack. The weight of his gaze prickled her skin. He remained standing, dripping onto the packed earth floor. His eyes, startlingly blue even in the dim cabin light, swept the room, not with the appraisal of a stranger, but with a quiet, unnerving recognition. They lingered on the faded quilt draped over her rocking chair, the one Thomas's mother had stitched, on the chipped blue mug beside the wash basin, his favorite. Elara's breath hitched. Stop it. Coincidence. He's observing. She approached, file in hand, heart hammering against her ribs. Your wrists, she managed. He extended his manacled hands without a word. The file scraped harshly against the iron, the sound loud in the tense silence. Closed now. She saw the intricate map of scars on his weathered skin, old knife wounds, the ragged tier of claws, the deep pockmark of a bullet grazed near his temple. A lifetime of violence etched onto his frame. Yet his stillness wasn't menacing. It felt weary, resigned. Why? The word escaped her lips before she could stop it, sharp as the file's edge. She kept her eyes fixed on the stubborn lock. Why did you say those things? Little Sparrow? The fence post? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice. That low rasp, barely audible over the rain on the roof. Heard it. A simple maddening statement. Heard it where? She pressed, frustration warring with fear. From whom? Thomas is gone. Silas didn't flinch. His gaze drifted past her shoulder again, settling on the small wooden keepsake box on the shelf near the hearth. Elara followed his look. Inside that box, beneath a lock of Thomas's hair and their marriage lines, lay the simple silver locket Thomas had given her on their wedding day. It was plain, unadorned, bought with his first mining strike. He'd whispered as he fastened it, solid as the mountains. Elara, like us. Silas's eyes rested on the box as if he could see through the wood. Solid as the mountains, he murmured. Almost to himself. Elara dropped the file. It clattered on the floor. The world narrowed to the pounding of her heart, and those impossible words, spoken in a voice that wasn't Thomas's, yet held the echo of his quiet certainty. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred her vision. Get out, she choked, pointing a trembling hand towards the barn. Sleep there. Don't come near the cabin. He didn't argue. He simply bent, picked up the file with surprising gentleness for his scarred hands, placed it on the table, and turned. The chains clanked as he walked out into the downpour, a dark shape dissolving into the gray sheets of rain heading towards the dilapidated barn. The uneasy routine began. Silas worked. Wordlessly. Relentlessly. He fixed the crooked fence post first, using tools from Thomas's shed with an unsettling familiarity. He patched the barn roof, where the shingles had blown loose in the last storm. He cleared the overgrown path to the spring. He did it all with a quiet, efficient competence, his movements economical, animal graceful. Elara watched from the cabin window, her rifle propped nearby, a constant knot of anxiety and bewildered curiosity tightening in her gut. He spoke only when necessary. Axe needs sharpening. Southfield's fence is down near the gully. His voice always that low rasp, devoid of threat, but heavy with unspoken things. He avoided her gaze, yet she felt his awareness, a palpable energy that prickled the air between them. He knew where the seed grain was stored without being told. He instinctively avoided the patch of wild flowers near the porch that Thomas had always left untouched for her. Each silent acknowledgement was a fresh twist of the knife, a deepening of the impossible mystery. 4 days after the auction, the external world intruded. Silas was splitting wood near the barn when a rider approached. Jed Carter, the blacksmith. His broad face grim beneath his hat brim. He reined in well short of the cabin, eyeing Silas warily. Elara stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Mrs. Vance, Jed called, his voice tight. Sheriff Pike sent me. Wanted you to know there's talk. Harlan Gage's men were in town last night. Bragging. Harlan Gage. The name was a cold stone dropped into Elara's stomach. A wealthy cattle baron whose vast herds grazed the open range south of Bitterroot. He'd been eyeing the smaller homesteads, including hers, for years, pressuring owners to sell. Thomas had stood firm. Now, with Thomas gone, Elara felt exposed. Bragging about what, Jed? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Jed shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, glancing again at Silas, who had stopped chopping, the axe held loosely, his back turned but his posture unnervingly alert. About how unwise folk can have accidents out here alone, especially widows holding on to land they can't properly work. He cleared his throat. Just be careful, Elara. Keep that rifle handy. He tipped his hat and wheeled his horse, kicking up mud as he hurried back towards town, eager to be gone from the presence of the mountain man. Elara stood frozen on the porch, the threat hanging heavy in the damp air. Gage's men, outlaws in all but name, empowered by their boss's money and ruthlessness. She looked towards Silus. He had turned now, his blue eyes fixed not on her, but on the southern horizon, where Gage's vast holdings lay. There was no fear in his gaze, only a deep unsettling stillness, like a mountain lake before a storm. He raised a hand slowly, almost unconsciously, to touch the old bullet graze near his temple. His lips moved, forming a single silent word that sent a fresh chill down Elara's spine, colder than any threat from Gage. The single word, gorge, hung like gun smoke in the rain-heavy air after Jed Carter's departure. Elara watched Silus, his hand still resting near the old bullet graze, his gaze locked on the southern horizon where Harlan Gage's ambition festered. The chill that word invoked wasn't just from the damp, it was the echo of Dead Man's Gorge, the place that birthed Silas Thorne's monstrous legend. Fear, cold and sharp, warred with the relentless pull of the impossible within him. He knew Thomas, he knew. Days bled into a tense rhythm. Silus continued his silent, efficient labor. He cleared the choked irrigation ditch behind the barn, repaired the sagging porch step without being asked, and began reinforcing the perimeter fence, his movements economical, born of wilderness necessity. Elara observed, rifle never far, her heart a battlefield. Every time he picked up Thomas's favorite maul, every time he instinctively reached for the oiled rag Thomas kept for his tools, the serpent of doubt tightened its coils. Yet, watching him cradle a newborn lamb separated from its ewe with surprising gentleness, his scarred hands careful against the fragile wool, chipped away at her fear. One evening, a brittle wind scoured the prairie, whining through the pines and rattling the loose shutter Silus hadn't yet reached. Elara sat by the hearth, attempting to mend a torn work shirt, the firelight flickering on Thomas's empty chair. The wind's mournful cry always unsettled her. Thomas used to say it sounded like lost souls. She found herself humming, a tuneless fragment against the noise, a habit from when storms frightened her as a child back east. Silus was outside, securing the barn doors against the rising gale. The wind snatched a particular wavering note from her lips, a specific cadence she hadn't consciously summoned. It was the opening strain of Shenandoah, the song Thomas would hum softly, his cheek against her hair on nights exactly like this, to soothe the storm's edge inside her. The cabin door creaked open. Silus stood framed against the darkness, the wind whipping his hair. He didn't enter, his eyes, reflecting the firelight, fixed on her. For a long moment, the only sounds were the wind's howl and the crackling logs. Then, low and rough, barely audible above the din, his voice carried the next few notes of the song. Not humming, singing, the same slightly off-key pitch Thomas had always used. Elara's needle pierced her thumb. A bead of blood welled, stark against the pale fabric. She stared at him, the familiar melody, sung in that unfamiliar ruined voice, wrapping around her like a ghostly embrace. How? The word was a breath, lost in the wind. He didn't answer. His gaze held hers, filled with an ancient sorrow that mirrored her own. He simply closed the door softly against the storm, leaving her trembling, the echo of Shenandoah mingling with the wind's lament. The next morning dawned unnervingly still, the air thick and charged, the sawtooths shrouded in bruised-looking clouds. Elara walked the perimeter fence Silus had been reinforcing, checking for storm damage. Near the southern boundary, where her meager claim butted against the vast, unfenced expanse Gage claimed as his range, she found it. Not wind damage, sabotage. A 10-foot section of newly strung wire had been deliberately cut, the posts kicked loose. Fresh hoofprints, several sets, churned the mud nearby, leading south towards Gage's territory. A crude symbol, a crisscrossed knife slash, was carved into one of the toppled posts. A message, clear and brutal, fear cold and immediate, washed over her. Jed's warning wasn't just talk. Gage's men had been here, testing her defenses, marking her land. Her grip tightened on the rifle she carried constantly now. They could have burned the barn, poisoned the spring. Her isolation felt like a target painted on her back. Silus appeared silently beside her, his gaze sweeping the damage, the tracks, the crude symbol. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath the scarred skin. He knelt, running his fingers over the knife marks on the post. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a grim recognition, a hardening of the lines around his mouth. "They won't stop," Elara said, her voice tight. "Not until they scare me off." Or, she couldn't finish. Silas stood, his shadow long in the ominous morning light. He looked towards the distant brooding silhouette of Dead Man's Gorge, barely visible beneath the storm clouds gathering above the peaks. "Gage wants the water rights," he stated, his voice flat. "This land holds the best spring for miles." He knew that too. Thomas had always prized that spring. He turned his intense blue eyes back to her. "They use the gorge, his men. Shortcut, hidden trails." He touched the bullet graze again, a reflexive gesture. "I know those trails, from before." The unspoken before hung heavy. Before the legends, before the fall, before whatever violence had carved him into this haunted figure. Elara searched his face, the weathered map of pain and survival. Was he warning her, offering something? The man who knew her husband's songs, her husband's promises, who bore the marks of Dead Man's Gorge. Could she trust him? Did she have a choice? Before she could speak, a low rumble echoed from the south. Not thunder, horses, several riders, cresting the rise on the open range, heading straight for her homestead. Not Gage's usual rough stock. These were hardened men on powerful mounts, their hats pulled low, dusters flapping. One carried a coiled rope slung over his saddle horn. They reined in just outside the broken fence line, their eyes cold and assessing, lingering on Elara, then dismissing Silus with contemptuous sneers. "Well now, Mrs. Vance," drawled the lead rider, a man with a broken nose and eyes like chips of flint. He spat tobacco juice onto her land. "Seems your fence ain't holding up so well. Dangerous, being out here alone. Things can happen. Accidents." His gaze flickered meaningfully toward Silus. "Especially when you keep unpredictable company. Gage is a reasonable man. He'd hate to see you get hurt. Makes a generous offer for troubled land." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The threat was naked now. She glanced at Silus. He hadn't moved, but his stillness was different now. The coiled tension of a wolf facing intruders, his eyes fixed on Broken Nose with terrifying intensity. He knew the danger wasn't just to the land, it was to her. The lead rider smirked, nudging his horse a step closer to the broken wire. "Time's wastin', widow. What's it gonna be?" Silas's hand twitched, not towards a weapon he didn't carry, but as if reaching for something absent. Elara saw it. The memory of Thomas facing down a drunken miner years ago flashed in her mind. Thomas, unarmed, stepping forward with that same protective stillness. The echo was shattering. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But survival, that demanded a leap into the terrifying unknown. Her fingers tightened on the cold metal of the rifle. She looked from the leering riders to Silas Thorne, the wild mountain man who knew her dead husband's soul. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the rifle, but instead of aiming it at the riders, she held it out horizontally towards Silus, her knuckles white, her voice trembling but clear against the oppressive silence. "Can you use this?" The silence after Elara's question stretched, taut as a bowstring. Broken Nose and his riders smirked, amusement crinkling their cruel eyes, offering a rifle to the chained mountain man, a widow's desperate folly. Silas Thorne didn't look at the weapon Elara held out, trembling but resolute. His gaze remained fixed on Broken Nose, that unnerving blue stare boring into the rider like a physical weight. The air crackled, thick with prairie dust kicked up by the horses and the ominous stillness before a storm. Dark clouds bruised the sky above the sawtooths, mirroring the tension on the ground. Then Silus moved. Not towards the rifle, but forward, one deliberate step that placed him squarely between Elara and the riders. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace Elara had seen when he worked, but amplified, radiating a dangerous calm that silenced the riders' smirks. He stopped just inside the broken fence line, the saboteur's crude symbol carved into the post beside him. "I reckon," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried over the nervous stamp of the horses, "you boys should turn those horses around." Ride back the way you came." There was no bluster, no threat implied. It was a statement of inevitability, cold as mountain stone. Broken Nose recovered first, puffing out his chest. "Or what, hermit? You gonna whisper us to death? Heard you talk to wolves. Nothin' but crazy." He spat, the glob landing near Silas's worn boot. "The widow's land is Gage's business, and you're in the way." Silas didn't flinch. His hand drifted, not to a weapon, but to the bullet graze near his temple, tracing the old scar. His eyes flickered, not with fear but with a dark, distant memory. "Dead Man's Gorge," he murmured, the words seeming to hang in the charged air. "Bad place for unfinished business." A flicker of unease passed over Broken Nose's face. The name held power, even among Gage's hard men. "You threatening us, Thorne, stating facts." Silas's gaze swept the riders, lingering on the man with the coiled rope. "Gage wants water. He'll get blood instead, starting with yours." He took another step forward, forcing the lead horse to sidestep nervously. The sheer, contained force of his presence was like a physical barrier. "Leave, now." For a heartbeat, violence seemed inevitable. Broken Nose's hand twitched near his holster. The rider with the rope tightened his grip. Elara's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. Her breath caught in her throat. She saw Silas's muscles coil, ready to spring, a feral readiness that spoke of a lifetime surviving worse odds. Then Broken Nose cursed, low and vicious. He yanked his horse's reins, wheeling it around. "This ain't over, Thorne. You hear? Gage don't take kindly to interference. And you, widow," he snarled at Elara, "you're signing your own death warrant here in this ghost." With a final glare, he spurred his horse, his men following in a cloud of dust that momentarily blotted out the homestead. The thunder of hooves faded southward, swallowed by the vast, brooding prairie. Elara lowered the rifle, her legs suddenly weak. The immediate threat was gone, but the air remained thick with menace, and the scent of dust and sweat. Silas stood motionless for a long moment, watching the dust settle, his shoulders tense. Slowly, he turned back towards her, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes softening into something guarded, weary. He glanced at the rifle still in her hands, then met her gaze. He knew. Elara breathed, the words escaping before she could stop them. "That rider, he knew your name, knew about the gorge." It was more than just the scar, it was the way Broken Nose had reacted to Silas's presence, the specific venom in his voice. Silas's expression closed like a shutter. He walked past her without a word, heading towards the barn where his meager belongings were stored. The dismissal stung, a fresh wave of confusion washing over her relief. He'd defended her, fiercely, instinctively. He knew Thomas's deepest secrets, yet the man himself remained a locked chest buried in the wilderness of his own past. The promised storm finally broke as dusk bled into night. Rain lashed the cabin roof, wind howling like the lost souls Thomas used to speak of. Elara huddled by the hearth, the fire struggling against the damp chill seeping through the logs. The confrontation replayed in her mind. Silas stepping forward, the echo of Thomas's protective stance, the chilling certainty in his voice when he spoke of the gorge and blood. A sudden sharp thump came from the lean-to storage shed attached to the cabin. Not the wind. Something solid hitting the wall. Instinctively, Elara grabbed the rifle again, heart hammering. An animal, or had Gage's men circled back? She crept to the small window overlooking the lean-to, peering through the rain-streaked glass. Silas was inside, illuminated by a single lantern he must have lit. He wasn't fixing anything. He was on his knees near the back wall, where Thomas had stored old mining gear and unused tools. With startling familiarity, Silas had pried up a specific loose floorboard Elara herself had forgotten about. A hiding place Thomas had used for a small strongbox containing a few gold nuggets from his first strike, long spent. But Silas wasn't reaching for where the strongbox had been. His scarred hand delved deeper into the cavity Thomas had hollowed out beneath the floor. Elara watched, frozen, as his fingers closed around something small and metallic, hidden further back, wrapped in oilcloth. He pulled it out, unwrapping it with a reverence that seemed alien on his rough hands. In the flickering lantern light, Elara saw it clearly, Thomas's old railroad pocket watch. Not valuable, but deeply personal. The glass was cracked, the brass casing dented from the mine collapse that had bruised Thomas's ribs years ago. He'd stopped carrying it afterward, declaring it unlucky, and hidden it away. Out of sight, out of mind, little Sparrow, he'd said with a wry smile. Elara hadn't thought of it in years. No one knew where it was. No one. Silas held the watch gently, his thumb rubbing over the dent in the casing, a gesture so achingly familiar. Thomas's gesture, that Elara's breath hitched. He didn't open it. He just held it, staring at the cracked face as if seeing something beyond the stopped hands, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Then, as if sensing her presence, his head snapped up, his eyes, reflecting the lamplight, met hers through the rain-blurred window. Not startled, not guilty, just knowing. He knew she'd seen, he knew what he held, and in that shared gaze across the stormy darkness, the question wasn't how he knew, it was why he'd sought it out now, in secret. The fragile trust forged in the face of Gage's men splintered, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. What else was he searching for in the bones of her past? The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air over Elara's homestead hung heavy, charged with the weight of unanswered questions. Silas Thorne stood in the lean-to, the cracked pocket watch cradled in his scarred hands, his blue eyes meeting hers through the rain-blurred window. That look, knowing, ancient, burdened, shattered the fragile trust Elara had dared to build. The watch, Thomas's hidden relic, was a wound reopened. She backed from the window, heart pounding, the rifle cold against her palm. Was he her husband's echo, or something darker, rummaging through her past? Dawn broke, gray and restless, the sawtooth peaks looming like silent judges. Elara barely slept, the storm's wail mingling with the ghost of Shenandoah in her mind. Silas was already outside, splitting wood with methodical precision, as if the night's discovery hadn't happened. She watched him from the porch, her shawl tight around her shoulders, the rifle propped nearby. His silence felt like a wall, but his every movement, each swing of the axe, each glance toward the wild flower patch Thomas had cherished, carried an unbearable familiarity. She couldn't avoid him forever. Not with Harlan Gage's threat circling like vultures. The sabotaged fence, the carved symbol, broken nose's sneer, they were promises of worse to come. Elara clutched the silver locket from the keepsake box, its weight a tether to Thomas's memory. Solid as the mountains, he'd said. Now, another man spoke his words, walked his land. She needed answers. Silas, she called, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He paused, axe mid-swing, and turned, his face unreadable. That watch. You knew where it was. Why? He set the axe down, slow, deliberate. His eyes drifted to the southern horizon, where Dead Man's Gorge cut a shadowed wound through the peaks. I see things, he rasped, voice low as the wind. Flashes, a mine collapsing, a man's ribs cracking, his hands hiding that watch, whispering to you. He met her gaze. I don't choose what comes. Elara's breath caught. Are you, him? Thomas? He shook his head, a flicker of pain crossing his scarred features. I'm Silas. But your man. His heart stayed. In this land. In me somehow. He touched the bullet graze near his temple, fell in the gorge, years back. Should have died. Woke up different. Knowing things. Names. Songs. You. Her knees weakened. A psychic gift. A spirit's echo. She didn't know, didn't care. The ache in her chest was too raw. Before she could speak, a low rumble broke the quiet. Not thunder, but hooves. Again, 5 riders this time, cresting the rise, their dusters black against the gray dawn. Broken Nose led them, a Winchester slung across his saddle. Gage wasn't negotiating anymore. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Elara and the riders, his body taut. Elara gripped her rifle, heart hammering. Stay back, she whispered. But Silas didn't move. Broken Nose reined in, smirking. Last chance, widow. Sign over the spring, or we burn it all down. You and your ghost. His eyes flicked to Silus, mocking but wary. Silas's voice was cold, steady. You know the gorge, don't you? Took your brother there. He didn't come back. Broken Nose paled, his hand freezing on the rifle. Silas's gaze bored into him. I see him, screaming. You left him. The riders shifted, uneasy. Elara saw it, the fear Silus wielded, not with a gun, but with truths no man should know. Broken Nose cursed, raising his Winchester, but Silus was faster, a blur of motion. He tackled the rider from his horse, pinning him in the mud. The others drew weapons, but Elara fired a warning shot into the air, her voice cutting through the chaos. Enough. The riders froze. Silus stood, releasing Broken Nose, who scrambled back, eyes wide with terror. You're cursed, he spat, mounting his horse. Gage'll hear of this. They fled, hooves thundering into the distance. Elara lowered the rifle, trembling. Silus turned, his expression softer now, almost sorrowful. They won't be back, he said. Gage fears what he can't control. She stared at him, the man who knew her husband's soul. She asked, voice breaking, why help me? Silus looked at the wildflower patch, then back at her. Because you're still here, little Sparrow. And so is he. He pressed the pocket watch into her hand, his touch warm, fleeting. Keep this. Keep him. By dusk Silus was gone, his shadow fading into the gorge's trails. Elara stood by the wildflowers, the watch heavy in her palm, the locket at her throat. The spring still flowed, her land still hers. Grief hadn't left, but it felt lighter, shared. Under the starlit sky, she hummed Shenandoah, and for the first time in years she didn't feel alone.